If you're watching any social news feed media or reading any news, you are keenly aware of the fact that layoffs are extremely prevalent right now. They're hitting a number of industries and market segments. So, regardless of where you are, you're not really immune to it, nor in many ways are you ever, which I think is a little bit of a misnomer that often leads people to being caught off guard when this stuff hits. The other thing is the economic uncertainty right now definitely is compounding this. So people's uncertainty are at an all-time high. And quite frankly, the likelihood of being laid off or the risk is significantly higher than maybe it was. I don't know. I'm not even going to put a date on it, but I don't need to deny this if you're familiar with what's going on. Now, if you're not, then listen up because the reality is layoffs are happening all over the place. And it's really important that you pay attention to that, not to be afraid of it, but so that you can be prepared. I would also guess that we're seeing this effect of layoffs happening. I don't anticipate that changing in the near term. So, and even if you're in an organization that feels sound and strong right now, that doesn't mean that it's not coming your way and that you don't need to be prepared for it. Quite frankly, as I'll talk about later, you need to always be prepared for what can come. Now, the thing about it is knowing that that's happening and being prepared are two very different things. And that's really what this video is about, is to talk about how do you be prepared well? Because the reality is no matter what the economic situation is or what company you're in, layoffs are a reality that you always need to be keenly aware of. So since it's a reality, since it's a constant, the best thing you can do is say, okay, that's a constant. I can't change that. So what can I do about that? And that's what we're going to talk about. So the first one is managing your emotions in this. And I say this very carefully because sometimes people hear manage emotions and it's said in kind of a head pat way, like control your emotions. That's not what I'm talking about. And I'm also not talking about denying the fact you have emotions. They're real. You can't deny them. In fact, denying them is probably one of the worst things you can do. However, you can manage them and know how to navigate what's going on and how you're feeling and how that connects to what's actually happening. Some things that can help through that management process so you don't get overwhelmed, because I think that's what happens when you don't manage them or you deny them, is they build up and suddenly they run out of control or they run rampant. So some things to consider about layoffs that can help you rightly manage your emotions is getting laid off sucks. There's no denying that. You talk to anybody who's been laid off with, there's some outliers where people are thankful for it or it goes perfectly. But for the most part, it sucks. But it's not the end of the world. I've been there myself. Again, do you have outliers? Might you find somebody where it really did end their world? Yes. But the majority of people, myself included, it was awful. I remember going through it. It sucks, regardless of the reason or the situation or how unhappy you were. It's awful, but you can get through it. And I think that's one of the key things, is if you can recognize and be prepared for the fact that, hey, if this does happen, it's going to be really bad, but uh, it, it's manageable and I will get through it, type of thing, can help you just at least keep your emotions in check and not get carried away with it. Something that can really help with that is if you're feeling uncertain about the environment or you're concerned about layoffs, talk to other people who have gone through it. And it may not be something that people are super open about. A lot of people don't necessarily like to talk about the fact that they've been laid off. But if you get to know some folks, or you know somebody who has been recently impacted or went through it, reach out, grab coffee, talk to them about how they navigated it or how that worked for them. I mean, here's the reality. If you're right about it, if you're concerned about getting laid off and you're right, and your name is on a list or it's coming, there's nothing you can do to get you taken off that list. I won't say there's nothing you can do, but the chances of, if your name ended up on a list somehow, it's not coming off of that list, most likely. So again, going back to layoffs in general, if you're on the list and it is going to happen to you, it's out of your control. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you feel better, but it at least can help you manage those emotions so that you're not spending a bunch of time and energy on things that ultimately are outside of your control. The other reason I would encourage you to be really careful about how you manage your emotions is once the doomsday line of thinking, not even dealing with the cognitive neuroscience side of how it's wiring in your brain, but even just in general, if you want my observations on this, is once I've seen people get on this cycle of negativity, once it kicks in, you actually end up in a death spiral, which makes things worse than they even maybe were before. So you're stressing about things you can't control anyway. You need to shift out of that. You need to shift out of what you can't control and focus on what you can. And you'll start seeing things. Problem is, when you get on this death spiral, you can end up seeing things that aren't really there. And that's not to say you're not observing real things, which we'll be talking about next. But when you get in this, oh, there's layoffs coming, you start reading things that aren't there. My boss said this, and I'm pretty sure that he's or she is indicating this, or I heard this in a company meeting, and I'm pretty sure that, and maybe that's true, but you are much more likely to read something that's not there, which just again creates this sense of anxiety, and it's not good. And on top of it, this is where it can get really bad. You can end up getting so distracted with trying to read things into things and worry about what you can't control that you can actually get off with your own performance, which, as you can imagine, may heighten the likelihood that you end up on a list that you weren't originally on. And I've actually seen this over the years where, if you're not familiar with how layoffs a lot of times happen, there's a lot of back and forth that goes into some of this stuff. So while I say if you're on the list, you're probably not getting off the list, it can happen. But what is more likely to happen is if you're so distracted and you're becoming a toxic employee who's spinning everybody up about the world's ending and layoffs are happening and the culture is terrible and you're not performing your work anymore, you may inadvertently end up putting yourself on that list. And that's one of the biggest reasons why. And here's the other piece with it is you can also negatively impact the way you represent yourself if you're interviewing for other companies or doing other activities to try and help prepare for things, which I'll talk about later. So this is where this whole negativity cycle of seeing things where they aren't, pretty soon everything's a conspiracy. You're ready for things to happen. Your performance starts to trip. You start becoming that toxic employee, and pretty soon, not only are you potentially on a list you weren't on a list before, but now you're not prepared and you're representing yourself poorly to other companies. Just all around a not good place to be in, and why it's so important not to deny the emotions that you're having and the feelings that you're dealing with as you go through this, but that you're managing it and managing it really well. Now, you do that right, okay? It is okay to look for the signs. And that is an important thing to do. But the reason I say you want to manage your emotions first is what I said before. You don't want to be seeing things when they're not there. So if you get your emotions in check, then you can actually start looking for the signs to see, is there validity to this? You know, maybe you've heard buzz about layoffs, or you've seen something on the layoff report, or you've somehow this is coming up, or the company's just going through a rough time. It is important to be looking for the signs. In many ways, I think predicting layoffs is kind of like the meteorology of work. You're trying to read a bunch of signs, and are you ever going to nail it and get it right? It's an art and a science that you may not get down, but it's a really important thing to be doing, and not just when the stench of layoffs is starting to creep through the culture. You want to be basically doing this at all times, because again, this is going to help you be not reacting to something. Instead, you're prepared and you can be a little more proactive with it. So obviously, one of the things that you can do is look at your company's performance. And this can be easier said than done, because a lot of times at work, it's easy to get caught in our silos of work. We're surrounding ourselves with our project teams or our functions, and we don't necessarily look at the broader organization. How is the organization overall performing? Now, I mean, town halls can be one way you can kind of see this, but there's an art and a science to navigating that, because it's rare, unless your company's really on a downturn, that a town hall is going to announce, hey, things are bad, things are not looking good. Usually that happens after the fact. And again, if your goal of looking for the signs is to read them before they happen, Town halls can be helpful, but some of the ways you would look at it is look for things like significant changes in priorities, significant changes in direction, significant changes in leadership at the top. Things like that would be better predictive indicators than waiting for someone to come out and say, hey, we're going to have layoffs. That's not going to happen until after they've happened. Now, if you're in a publicly traded company, it can be a little bit easier because you can look at your quarterly reports or your annual reports to see how is the company performing financially? Are they doing well? But you also have to read the economy. The overall economic situation is important as well, because here's the thing. If the entire economic situation is not doing great, then your company not doing great may not be as much of a predictive indicator of layoffs as if the economy's booming, things are going great in your industry, in your segment, or overall, and your company's not. Then that's going to be a more predictive indicator of, hey, I better be careful, be aware of what's happening. But if in general there's a pretty big economic downturn, that can be less of an indicator. Now, where you have to be careful of that is a lot of times what happens in layoffs is there's almost this domino effect. Companies start laying people off, and even companies that are doing okay kind of go, well, this is kind of what's happening now. Is this an opportunity for us to maybe right size or do another look at our org and workplace planning and see, is there something that we could be doing? Because hey, everybody else is doing it, we might as well do it now, since it's kind of the spirit of what's happening, which is again why that stench of layoffs gets in the air. It does affect things, not only employees, it affects companies, and suddenly they start thinking about layoffs maybe when they wouldn't have had everything been fine. So you need to just really be paying attention. And this is where I a lot of times tell people to get their eyes up and not be so focused on their work or their team. Yes, you need to be focused on that, but you also need to be paying attention to things more broadly. Something else that can be really important is being objective about your performance. I would say this is one of the areas so many people lack self-awareness. A lot of people tend to think they're a rock star and they're nailing it and they're crushing it. And people either tend to way over index on what they think their performance is, or they way under index. Better to be under indexed on it than over indexed if you're concerned about layoffs. Because the reality is, not everyone can be a rock star. And while being laid off is not necessarily an indicator of your performance, it's not always an indicator. A lot of times that does factor into whether you end up on a list or whether you're impacted. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that assessment of your performance is accurate, but what it does often mean is the perception of your performance is not maybe what you think it is, and things like that. And so you need to be really objective about it. And here's the thing I would say about this. Don't just count on your performance reviews as the indication. Well, I had a performance review last quarter or last year and it was a thumbs up, or my boss said I was fantastic. That's not always a good indicator, because the reality is people in general don't like conflict, and bosses are not always the best at giving direct feedback and being candid with people. So even if they maybe are seeing performance issues, they may not bring this up. So you need to be careful about this and be realistic and ask, I'll talk about what to do about it. But again, just be really careful in this area. Look for things like, do people proactively engage with you outside of just even within your team, but even outside your team? Are people coming to you without asking? Things like that. Do people come say, hey, I need your help? Hey, are people aware that you're a real asset and they're coming and seeking you out? Do you get unprompted positive feedback from people? Are you receiving praise for things that, from different sources? Those are good ways to objectively assess, hey, how am I doing? Am I valued in this organization? Some other things that you can look for is, has the relationship with your boss recently changed? Have things suddenly gotten weird? And again, I can't give like a checklist here. Here's everything to look for. But usually when I talk to people, when they experience layoffs, they may not have been watching for this sign, but then when they look back, they go, you know what? Things did get awkward in one-on-ones. Suddenly, when I would ask about the future of what plans or projects looked like, I didn't really get clear answers. And I maybe wasn't always clear, but something seemed odd, or they were a little dodgy about things like that. Or I talked about the future and wasn't really, it's something seemed off. So be looking for that. And this is why you have to manage your emotions, because if you're not careful, this is where you'll start to see it everywhere. Oh, they seemed off today. I'm pretty sure that means they're trying to lay me off. This is why you got to be careful, because you can start to be Chicken Little and start to see this everywhere. So I think that's just my biggest caution when it comes to looking for the signs is do it, absolutely, but get those emotions in check first and make sure that you're accurately reading the signs and not just doing, seeing things that aren't really there. Is the boogeyman's around every corner type of situation. Okay, finally, here's the thing. Regardless, like I said, if this is happening, in many regards, this is way outside of your control. But that doesn't mean everything's out of control. And I think that's one of the things that often leads to emotions just driving things, is that you can feel like things are out of control. And as a result, you just let everything loose. The reality is there is a lot you can control. And that's one of the things that leaning into that can actually help you navigate this really well. Because if you're focused, if you have your attention on things that are within your control, you're less likely to be distracted by the things that are completely outside of your control. So one of the biggest things is not getting sucked into that doomsday culture. Don't get sucked into that. And you may say, I thought you said this is something I should do. Now you're telling me not to do something. Right. So how do you not do that? You get sucked into focusing on the things you can control. There's going to be, if the stench of layoffs is in the air, there's going to be no shortage of conversations happening, talking about this, trying to predict what's happening, spreading stories and gossip of this and that that's going on in the organization. And it can be really alluring to get pulled into that. Taking the intentional, I'm not going to participate in this. I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to seek these kinds of things out. That's an action that you can control. You have control of that. And this, again, will have a lot of positive benefits, not only for your mental well-being, but realistically, so that you don't get sucked into this stuff. And the best way you can achieve not getting sucked into it, here's 4 things that you can really consider when it comes to it. First, keeping your performance on track is one of the best things that you can do, because if there are layoffs happening and people are trying to decide who do we need to keep and who can go, the last thing you want to do is give people a reason to go, you know what, we really could do without this person. And if your performance is way off track, you have just given a giant reason. Now, one of the ways, going back to having those conversations with your boss, a lot of times when people are trying to figure out, is my performance on track? I think I'm on track, but am I going back to being objective about this? Because just because you think you're nailing it doesn't mean you're nailing it. One way that you can find out or get some indicators is, don't ask your boss, am I doing all right? Am I working on it? That's a yes or no question that doesn't necessarily open the door for things. And again, remember, your manager's a person too. They're uncomfortable with critical feedback. So open the door, make it easier for, are there things? Ask, are there things that I could be doing differently? Don't ask, am I doing okay? Ask proactively, what could I be doing better at? Are there some things that I could be improving on that would help you or help this team, type of a thing? That's a simple shift you can make in your questioning to either your boss or other people on project teams to try and get that feedback, not only to assess how am I doing, but also look for ways to improve right now so that you can focus on how can I get better and reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to say, you know what, Christopher is not someone we probably, if we had to make a difficult decision, Christopher is probably someone that we could do without. And this is a way you can prevent that. Now, the other thing is, you don't want balls to drop, obviously. Okay. And I think that's one way that people, manage their performances. Well, I need to make sure I follow. That is one of the simplest things you can do to improve your performance. Follow through with your commitments. You said you were going to do something, make sure you do it. What can happen though, and this is why I say you need to manage your emotions, is if you're paranoid or Chicken Little freaking out, sometimes people flip into overdrive and they're trying to hyper accomplish everything or stretching themselves way too thin. And the problem with this is you start stretching yourself too thin. This is then when you actually can see your performance dip. And that's why you need to be careful. Make sure you're working on the right things. Again, asking questions about this is a good question for your boss. What would be the most important things for me to be focused on right now? If the company's in some uncertainty, if things are feeling a little weird with your boss, if things are a little uncomfortable right now, those are two ways that you can really improve things, to say, what are things I could be doing better? What are things I could be doing differently? And what are the most important things for me to be working on right now? Because the last thing you need to do is be burning the midnight oil, trying to show how much value you're adding, only to find out you were pouring a bunch of time and energy into things that people ultimately didn't really care about. Something else that's outside of work is getting your finances in order. I cannot tell you the number of people I've talked to who one of the main drivers for uncertainty and agita around layoffs is their financial situation is not in a good spot. Top driver for concern about this. I can even just say that in my own life. Earlier in my career, I did not have my finances in order. And so the thought of possibly losing my job was terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying, because it was like, how would I even pay my rent this month or my mortgage this month if I didn't have a job? And you'd be surprised if you get your finances in order, and this is something you can control in this environment, is start having a goal to get some living expenses set aside. If you got a ton of debt, pay it down. If you've got, some things you need to take care of or things you can offload, reevaluate where your money's going and say, do we need to purge some of these things just so we can be in a better position? I can tell you time and time again, when I've seen people take the time to get their finances in order, their stress level about the possibility of getting laid off just falls through the floor. It really does, because now suddenly the thought of, obviously, no matter what, it sucks, but the concern of, yeah, but what if I didn't have a job tomorrow, isn't as scary, because it's like, well, I'd have a couple months or a few months or ideally 6, 12 months before I really need to stress about that. Now, that may seem overwhelming to think that far out. Start small. You don't need to worry about having 6 months of living expenses put in a bank account or in a savings account somewhere. It doesn't need to be your initial goal. Your initial goal can be small, and then over time, let it grow. But that is a really effective way to make yourself not stressed when these kind of environmental things. It'll also help you manage those emotions, because instead of freaking out, you'll know you're all right. Something else that is within your control, that if you're in this environment or concerned about what's happening from a layoff standpoint, develop new skills or enhance the ones you have. This is something that can be beneficial not only for, you might survive the round of layoffs, maybe you're not even impacted, but hey, you want to show more value to your organization, be perceived as a more valuable employee, or possibly get a promotion or do something different even within the org. Building and showing new skills is a fantastic way to do that. Or if you end up ultimately getting laid off, nothing looks better to a prospective hiring manager than someone who is proactively building new skills and growing and developing what they're doing. And this is something that is well within your control, even amidst all the uncertainty. You have the ability to control what you're doing with your skills. And there are loads of free resources out there. Now, I'm not just talking about watching TED Talks. I'm talking about, there are legit classes that you can take for free to actually build some skills around this. They're for low cost, no to low cost type stuff that you can go out and do. And if you ever want to know what some of those things are, look at some of my other videos. I talk to companies all the time that are in this space and are offering these kinds of things to folks. And or reach out to me personally. I'm happy to help. I do a lot of work in this space. Now, the last thing, and then I'll close here. One of the other things I talked about, finances being really impactful. Another one that I often see that leads to a ton of agita about possible layoffs is not being ready for a transition. You'll hear me talk about this in pretty much any video about how to navigate work. You should always be ready for a transition, even if there's no reason to be. But this is one of the things you've got to be intentional and proactive about, because the reality is when you're safe, it's easy to get complacent. You're comfy, not necessarily feeling a whole lot of urgency around it. Pretty soon that complacency sets in, and that complacency goes on not just a week, pretty soon it's a month, pretty soon it's a few years. Next thing you know, you are not ready for a job transition, and suddenly the stench of layoffs fills the room and you go, I'm not ready for this. I haven't talked to, I don't have any networking. I don't have my resume even ready. These are things you can do. And look, if you're in that situation now and you're that person who's been complacent for a bit going, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. You can get through it. But one of the things that I would say is don't ever let yourself get there again. That was a lesson I learned. When I got laid off, I was not prepared. And I said, I will never let that happen again. And that doesn't mean living in fear. It just means about being proactive about things like getting into a regular rhythm of networking. I talked about it on if you haven't seen my video on how to use LinkedIn, go check it out, because I talk about how to use LinkedIn to regularly network. So you're not that person that just gets laid off and suddenly you're setting up a bunch of calls with people and they go, yep, let me guess, you got laid off, type of a thing. You don't want that to be the case. Not that that's a bad thing if that does happen, but you can be proactive about it so people don't feel like that's the only reason you're reaching out. So getting into that rhythm of networking is something you can do now. Go get started on that. Being active on LinkedIn, are there other social channels? Sure. But when it comes to professional, there isn't anyone better than LinkedIn. So being active, which check out my video if you're like, so what do I do on LinkedIn? I'm glad you asked. I made a video about just that. Not going to repeat it here. Go check it out. But that's something you can do proactively. Update your resume if you have not. I think this is another one that's so simple, yet you'd be amazed how stressful it can be if all of a sudden something happens and you're trying to quickly put together a resume. Again, you're not in the right frame of mind, where if you're doing this proactively, you're in a better position to do it well. The other thing you can do, even if you are just concerned or hesitant, so often people wait to apply to jobs till they need to take a job. And I would encourage people all the time, if there's something that looks interesting or something that you're curious about, or even if you just want the practice of potentially getting a call and having an interview, go for it. Go for it and do that. It will help you feel better and less stressed about the possibility of losing your job. So those are 4 really simple or complex, depending on how far you want to go on them. But those are things that you can control. Keeping your performance on track, getting your finances in order, developing new or building your existing skills, and being ready for a transition if you need it. Focus on those 4 things. It will help you manage your emotions. And then at the same time, be looking for those signs in your organization to see, is this really something I need to be concerned about? But even if it's not, still always be ready.